You grew up in a world that no longer exists. Not the world of the 90s aesthetically. The Walkman, the particular static of a VHS rewinding, the sound of a dial-up modem connecting like it was negotiating with the future. Something more fundamental than that. You grew up in the last childhood that was fully offline, where attention wasn't a resource being competed for, where presence didn't require performance, where boredom arrived without an algorithm immediately solving it. You know what it felt like to memorize your best friend's phone number, to call their house and speak to whoever answered, to spend an entire afternoon with no record of it existing anywhere, no photos, no check-in, no evidence except your own memory. And then the internet arrived, and you adapted, as you always do. But something in you formed before that adaptation was required. This video is what that actually is, not the nostalgic version, the neurological one. Let's start with the biology. Stephen Porges, whose polyvagal theory has become one of the most influential frameworks in modern neuroscience, documented something foundational about how the autonomic nervous system develops. It doesn't just respond to immediate threat or safety. It learns, through thousands of daily interactions, what environments are safe to settle into. The social engagement system, the branch associated with calm, genuine connection, and felt safety, develops most robustly in environments where stimulation is predictable, connection requires real presence, and there is sufficient space between inputs for the nervous system to regulate itself. The 1990s childhood provided all three, not by design, simply because the technology that would disrupt all three didn't exist yet. When you sat in the back of your parents' car on a long drive with nothing but the window and your own thoughts, no screen, no content, just the landscape and the silence, and eventually your own mind finding something to do, your nervous system was building something, a baseline, a capacity for regulation that develops specifically in the absence of constant input. That baseline is what people sense when they talk to you now. The steadiness, the unhurried quality, the way you can be in a room without needing the room to perform for you. It isn't personality, it's architecture, built during a developmental window that closed before most people born after you reached it. Here's what boredom was actually doing. Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia published research showing that people would rather administer mild electric shocks to themselves than sit quietly alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. That finding describes what happens to a nervous system trained on constant stimulation. Unstructured mental time doesn't feel like rest, it feels like emergency. For you, boredom was a regular condition. You know the specific texture of a summer afternoon with nothing to do. The way you'd flip through the same television channels twice, finding nothing. The way you'd lie on the floor of your bedroom, listening to the same album for the third time because it was what you had. The way your mind would eventually stop waiting for input and start generating it. A story, a game, a daydream that took you somewhere the afternoon couldn't. That wasn't wasted time. That was your nervous system learning one of its most important lessons. That discomfort rises, peaks, and fades without requiring immediate relief. That silence isn't an emergency. That capacity is now rare enough that psychologists are actively studying how to teach it. You developed it accidentally, through dozens of long afternoons with nothing to do and no way to escape that fact. Here's what waiting built. Walter Mischel's foundational research on delayed gratification documented something the 1990s childhood provided as a condition rather than a lesson. You waited weeks for a movie to appear at the video store, scanning the new releases wall every Friday. You saved for months to buy a single album. You recorded songs off the radio with your finger hovering over the pause button, trying to cut off the DJ before he talked over the ending. Desire didn't lead directly to fulfillment. Time sat in between. And that time wasn't deprivation, it was process. Worth noting, a 2018 replication study found that delayed gratification's predictive power reduced significantly when controlling for socioeconomic factors. The relevant point for 1990s children isn't superior self-control, it's that their environment repeatedly demonstrated that waiting was survivable, and that what they waited for eventually arrived. That demonstration, accumulated over years, builds a specific trust in process. You don't need everything immediately, not because you've trained yourself out of wanting it, because you remember, in your body, that waiting didn't kill you. Here's where it gets more honest. You were not simply shaped by what you had, you were shaped by what you watched disappear. You remember the exact moment the internet stopped being something you went to and became something you lived inside. When texting replaced calling, when away messages gave way to timelines, when you could no longer be genuinely unreachable, and how strange that felt at first, and then how normal, and then how you couldn't quite remember what the strangeness had felt like. Porges' framework describes a nervous system that develops its baseline in a specific environment and then has to recalibrate when that environment changes. For you, that recalibration wasn't a single event. It was continuous. Each new platform, each acceleration of pace, each new expectation of availability required adjustment while the original settings remained underneath. This is what it means to be a bridge generation neurologically, not just culturally. Fluent in two worlds, capable of moving between them, and carrying, often invisibly, the cognitive cost of that constant translation. That cost rarely gets named because the competence is so visible. Others see the adaptability and assume ease, but inside, there is often a quiet fatigue. The specific exhaustion of a nervous system that has been recalibrating for decades without a stable environment to settle into permanently. Here's what the source scripts in this space don't quite reach. There's a feeling many people who grew up in the 1990s recognize but rarely articulate, the sense of being slightly out of rhythm with the world around them. Not disconnected, not resistant, adapted, repeatedly, continuously, without anyone naming the cost. Psychologists studying third culture individuals, people who have lived between two worlds and belong fully to neither, document a specific profile: high adaptability, strong code switching capacity, and a persistent low-grade sense of not quite being home anywhere. The bridge generation dynamic produces something similar. You move fluently across contexts, but anchoring is diffuse. Neither world fully understands you. And underneath the adaptability is something that takes longer to name, a form of emotional gravity, the specific weight of having watched a world disappear while you were still learning to belong in it. Not sadness exactly, more like carrying something that others don't know you're carrying, because from the outside, you look completely fine. Here's the honest cost. The same nervous system that learned to settle without constant input also learned to minimize what it visibly needs. You became skilled at absorbing strain privately, at adjusting without announcing, at being the person who figures it out, because that's what you always did, in bedrooms with one telephone between the family and afternoons that required you to generate your own direction. Others read the steadiness as ease, the quiet as contentment, the adaptability as resilience without remainder. But the steadiness sometimes costs more than it shows. The quiet sometimes holds more than it lets out. And the adaptability, continuous, decades-long, often unremarked, asks something of a nervous system that rarely gets to acknowledge what it's being asked. The regulation is real. The presence is real. The capacity to sit with uncertainty without collapsing is real and increasingly rare. But understanding it fully starts with acknowledging what it required, not just crediting the output, seeing what the process continues to quietly ask. Here's what this understanding is actually for: not to establish that one generation is better, not to reclaim what's gone, but to give language, finally, to an experience that has been operating without it. If you recognize yourself in this, in the regulation, the bridge fatigue, the emotional gravity, the quiet cost of decades of adaptation, you have something more useful than nostalgia, an accurate map of your own nervous system, of how it formed, what it built, and what it has been quietly asking for in return. You are not out of step. The world moved. You adapted. And you are still adapting, which is both your greatest strength and the thing most worth finally acknowledging as effort, rather than taking for granted as simply who you are. If this names something you've been carrying without language for it, drop a comment. What do you remember that the people around you have already forgotten? And if you want content that takes the psychology of how you actually move through the world seriously, subscribe. We make videos for people who'd rather understand themselves than feel better about themselves. That's the difference.